What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Ryan Manion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Manion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. All right, we are back with another episode of the Resilient Life podcast. I have today with us Pete Hegseth. Pete, welcome to the Resilient Life.
Hey, Ryan, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So it's funny, I was sharing with my dad that you were coming on the show, and, you know, the first thing he said is like, tell Pete I said hi and thank you, because he still talks about, you know, when he ran for Congress in 2008 and you had just put together Vets for Freedom. It was fairly new at the time.
Yeah.
And you came down to Bucks County and you brought a ton of veterans that did door knocking for him. And, you know, I talk about that race because it really, at the time, it was this referendum on the Iraq War. My dad was a Gold Star father, still in the Marine Reserves, running against the only Iraq War veteran in Congress. And so it got a lot of national play. And, you know, my dad received more votes than any Republican challenger in the state of Pennsylvania. But the Obama wave was just, it was too much. But, you know, what a incredible experience to be a part of that and kind of understand how the whole process works. And, you know, it was a big deal for our family.
Well, I'm a big admirer of your dad. I remember that vividly because I was a rookie in anything political too. You know, we were Vets for Freedom, and then you had Vets for Freedom PAC, and then we were trying to find vets candidates, and then we were introduced to your dad as a Gold Star candidate, and then it was that referendum race he was running against. It was Patrick Murphy, right?
Yeah.
Like that. Yes. And he was against the war, and your dad was supposed. It was one of those races where it's just emblematic of everything we were fighting for. And he was such a great spokesman, such a man of integrity, like represented Travis and you and everybody so well. I mean, we need men like your dad in the arena all over the place. I mean, so I wish he'd won. I know he's still stayed engaged and everything, but tell him I said hey as well. He's one of the good guys.
Well, we joke because, you know, I'm close with Patrick now. It took a few years to, you know, get past the bruises, but I have a picture here in my office, and it's actually of my dad and Patrick at one of the debates, and the debates got very heated and very hot, and the credits are rolling because it was on our local cable access, and my dad and Patrick both have their fingers pointed at each other, and as the credits started rolling, you see them both like walk towards each other. And then the camera cuts, and I'm watching it from my house, and I'm like, oh my God, you know, just thinking, I hope nothing is happening here. But we always joke, the newspaper had gotten this photo, and it's super iconic because it's just the two of them, and they're, you know, you can feel the intensity with them. Oh, wow. Yeah. But so that's where we first got introduced. That was back in 2007. And gosh, where our careers have led us, it's kind of crazy to see where you are today. You're, you know, with Fox and Friends, but also just kind of fighting for democracy and freedom. You've got a new book out, The War on Warriors, Behind the Betrayal of the Men Who Keep Us Free. I've got a copy of it. Came out on June 4th.
Yes.
And I was on the golf course on June 4th. Or maybe it was the 3rd. I'm on the golf course and I'm golfing in a Travis Manion Foundation golf event. I'm with a couple of veterans are in my foursome. And the one guy says, hey, have you ever heard of this Pete Hegseth? And he's talking to the other, to the guy in his cart. And I'm listening. And he said, yeah, I just heard him on Ben Shapiro talking about his new book. And he started talking about some of the concepts in your book. And I said, hey, I've got him coming on the podcast in a few days. But the point is like, clearly what the message you're putting out here, people are listening to it. And this is a, Marine lieutenant colonel still in the reserves that I was talking to about this. And
oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And And we got into one of the things that we got into was, I guess, when he was listening to you with Ben Shapiro, really what took note with him was your stance on women in combat roles. And
Yep.
when I got the book, I flipped around with it, but I went right to that chapter, which is chapter 5. And it is The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors is the name of that chapter. And so I read that chapter, but there's something you wrote here on page 66, and I want to read it. You said, I'm going to say something politically incorrect, but that is a perfectly commonsensical but that is a perfectly commonsensical observation. Dads push us to take risks. Moms put the training wheels on our bikes. We need moms, but not in the military, especially in combat units. So I read that as I was preparing, literally standing at my kitchen counter, signing the paperwork for my daughter to head to the Naval Academy in June. and I immediately marked it up with my pen and I said, I'm talking to Pete about this. And so I know it's out of context just reading that one line from your book, because
Correct.
Obviously you talk more broadly about combat roles. But do you feel that women in general should not be in the military? I mean, what are you saying there? Okay.
No, I mean, I think that was, you take that one sentence and makes it sound like mom shouldn't be in the military.
Yeah.
And I know that's not what you're inferring, and that's certainly not what I'm saying. And I'm profuse in the book and elsewhere about the contributions that women make in the military. It's undeniable.
Yeah.
But first, I mean, on the home front when they weren't in the military, and now in the military, with all the ways in which they contribute, from intelligence to helicopter pilots to logistics to medical field, whatever, you name it, they're everywhere. And they're some of the top performers I've ever worked with. So that is certainly not what I'm saying. What I'm making a strong argument behind, and I will back up with data and back up with experience, is that when it comes to combat units, the rush and the push to insert women into those units was foolish. It doesn't make us more lethal, and it ignored the data. It ignored the reality, the biological reality that men and women are different when it comes to lung capacity and bone density and muscle strength and testosterone and physicality. And actually, it was actually throughout the book, the force that comes out looking the best is the Marine Corps. I mean, it's the only force that's actually tried to fight back against all of this stuff, right? And in fact, in that, I think it's that chapter where I go through the study
You do,
that the Marine Corps did.
Yep.
And, you know, the Army and the Air Force, they just laid down. I mean, they just laid down and said, fine, women in combat positions, whatever, and they didn't even try. The Marine Corps at least said, okay, the politicians are telling us we need to put women into combat roles. We're going to do a study first to demonstrate, to find out what the efficacy is of that. And of course, the 400 male Marines outperformed the 300 male and 100 female Marines substantially, to which Ray Mabus in the Navy just threw the report out. And they said, I don't care, we're integrating. And to me, that was the beginning of a philosophical shift away from, we have standards, we're held accountable to those standards. We do things for a reason, and the public might not always love every reason of it. But one of those is to minimize distractions inside combat units, and male only does that the best for us and has over time. And we think continuing that's important. And at the very least, maintaining standards at that level is important. So if you want to allow female access to every combat slot, fine. I mean, I don't agree with that, but that's a sensible argument. And then you can't lower the standards at all,
right? Not
one bit. And the book and the experience and the conversations I had are rife with examples, formal and informal, where undue command influence and command influence created an environment where, Lieutenant, she's going to pass. She's a go at this station. And everybody else is looking around like, what, she didn't pass the station. It doesn't matter. We go moving on in Ranger School, moving on in Airborne School, moving on in this. And that's not good. That's bad for the culture. And I would imagine your daughter wouldn't want to be treated by a different standard or be perceived as be in a unit because of her gender or because of their race. And another example, it doesn't do her any good either in the perception of leadership. So we need female soldiers, we need female Marines, we need female sailors. And there's incredible contributions they will make, but I don't think it's in combat arms. And I think it's the very rare female who can compete physically with men. And that is a rare exception. And I don't think we should set policy around exception. I think it's much more clear, much more simple the other way around. That's not a genie that's that difficult to put back. I mean, they'll go nuts if a future administration actually tried to do this, but it's sensible, it's straightforward. It was what we were doing until 10 minutes ago, and it's easily defensible. And I've been debating this for a long time. I used to debate Martha McSally, a fighter pilot, on all the time when this was happening. And you know, it got a little feisty, but there's a difference between moving a joystick in a cockpit and carrying 100-pound ruck. That's very different.
Yeah.
And I think we should be just honest about that reality.
No, and I agree. And I think I agree with the idea of standards should not be lowered for anyone to be a part of a combat unit. There is a very big difference, you know, from a combat Marine and a communications, you know, somebody that's a PAO. There's a difference, and there's different standards. And so I agree with you on that. It was just that one sentence stuck out, and I'm like, I need him to.
You know what? Yeah, maybe on the paperback, I might have to just make a little edit there and make it a little clearer than it was there. By the way, congratulations to your daughter. That's super cool.
Yeah. And
the whole book for me is a grappling with, you know, continuing. You came from a military family. You're in one.
Yep.
You're the type of family that this nation has relied upon, is that it's a generational commitment, and you're continuing that bond. I was the first, more or less, had in my family. And so my question is, do I want to start maintaining that? And that, you know this, you talk to a lot of vets. That's a big question for a lot of vets these days.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things I love that you put in the book is, you know, listen, the book heavily criticizes the way the military is currently run, some of your personal experiences with it. You know, you've got a lot of data to back up a lot of this stuff, but you write in there, I don't plan to be the last Hegseth that joins the military. You've got, how many sons do you have?
5 sons.
Yeah.
And I write it to sons because I try not to be politically correct in this.
I get it.
To be straightforward, but if my daughters wanted to serve, fantastic.
Right.
And they know that. Yeah. So and you know what I used? You saw it. If you looked at that letter that I wrote in the back, I end the epilogue with a letter to my sons. And I use a quote that is the centerpiece of your organization, that your brother said, that has never left my head ever. And I will never let it leave the heads of my kids, which is, if not me, then who? And that's going to be in their ears when they're 16, 17, 18, and they may choose otherwise, and that's their prerogative. But I'm going to give them every chance to say yes. Yeah.
And, you know, I look at this idea that no organization is perfect, right? And so, you know, whatever field my kids decide to go to, there's going to be imperfections in it. But I'm heavily invested in the recruiting crisis that is facing our country right now. And really, if you look at the data, a large factor in that is because people who join the military primarily come from families of people that join the military. And that number is getting so much smaller. And so, listen, you know, Maggie was never pushed to do anything. Just like my brother, my dad was a career Marine, 30 years, retired as a colonel. I just had my dad on the podcast for Memorial Day, and my dad said, I never once even encouraged your brother to join the military. He just grew up in an environment where he had incredible leadership and mentors around him that just so happened to be Marines. You know, and so it was just kind of guiding by example and them living it. And so when you look at where we are today, and we've got a lot of issues, and then we have service branches that aren't meeting their recruiting requirements, that's a scary place to be in. What do you think is that we can lend to, like, one idea of how we can fix the recruiting crisis? And I will mention that, just like you say, the Marine Corps pushed back on that one thing, the Marine Corps is, in fact, the only service branch that has met their requirements.
100% correct. Yeah. We did that this morning on Fox and Friends. They've met it, and they've met it without lowering the number,
right?
Which is how the Army is going to try to meet it in the future. So the Army only met 75% of its goal. The Air Force met, I think, 85% of the goal, and the Navy 80% of their goal, Marine Corps 100%. So in 2024, the Navy is now only 70% of their goal, and the Army lowered their standard by 10,000 troops. So they might meet it, but they've already reduced.
Right.
Here's what I think the military has done, and there's been a cumulative effect of this. I think they kind of pulled a Bud Light. I think they tried to reach a sort of a particular subset of a demo based on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and who they want, who their target percentage numbers are. And in catering to these non-traditional constituencies, they ticked off boys from Kentucky and Oklahoma and Texas and Wisconsin, who have always been the core of who joins our military. And as a result, I've said this, and it's true. There aren't enough like lesbians in San Francisco to staff the 82nd Airborne. Like, you're not. Who are you recruiting right now? It's normal masculine men of all backgrounds who have traditionally joined our military at the clip of 90%. Okay, if that's your core group, you better target that group for active service in your military, not make them feel like, okay, we might want you, but we want all these other groups first or categories first. And the phrase that sticks out in my head time and time again, and they use it at the Naval Academy, and they use it from the Pentagon podium, and they use it from the West Point, is that our diversity is our strength. And that's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard in my life, especially in the military. Our strength is not our diversity. Our strength is our unity. Our strength is the fact that, yes, we are individuals of different backgrounds and different genders and different races, but we all go through the same crucible of training. We come out the other side with a uniform and a bad haircut, and ultimately we've got orders to work as a team toward a unified mission, not as an individual with my own desires, but as a collective group pushing forward. That's what makes the military different. You forge that team. You're fighting for your brothers and your sisters on your left and your right, and nothing else matters. And so when you start to introduce other priorities, your traditional recruits go, I think I'm going to take a hard pass. Or, the vaccine mandate has forced a lot of people who were going to join to not join or to get out. So, and it's already a narrow group of people. You know this, Ryan. I think the number is 77% of Americans, men and women at the age of 18, already don't qualify for military service.
Well, yeah.
So that's
a problem.
Obesity, you've got intelligence, you've got criminal records, you've got drug use, you've got all of this. So 3/4 of American kids can't serve anyway. So you already got a smaller pool. And the recruiters, by the way, always use that as an excuse. The military is always like, well, we got too many fat kids. And that's true. But that number's always been around that level for decades. So something's changed with that remaining 25 or 30% that are just choosing not to serve. I think you need a new commander in chief that fires the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and has targeted firings on top of people that were put in positions because they're pursuing gender ideology stuff or DEI stuff or climate change stuff. You need to make sure curriculum at Annapolis and West Point is stripped of all the Marxist garbage that's made its way in. And then you need to run the commercials we used to run in like 1985. Whatever they were, like the Marine Corps has stuck to, the few, the proud. It's sticking to like who we are and what we represent. I remember those Marine Corps ads. I don't know, what were they? Were they like in the 2000s or?
Yeah.
They were just badass. I'm like,
they still have them.
Cool.
I still see them on billboards. I just drove by. I saw a few, the proud, the brave Marine Corps.
And that's why they're joining the Marine Corps. But the Army's, it's like be you in the Army. It's like,
well,
be,
So you talk about like, that the diversity is not what makes the military great. But I talk about it in a little bit of a different way, because I'll say like the diversity. And when I speak to that, like there is no more diverse organization within our country that come from different backgrounds,
correct,
different socioeconomic backgrounds that can come together and accomplish a common goal. So the military is actually a great social experiment when you look at it from that perspective. And I say, like, how do we take the principles, the fundamentals that are inherently what the military represent and push them out to greater society for us to all understand how we all play a role in accomplishing a common goal, which is, protecting our democracy and what makes America great.
I think it's a great point, but I don't think it's something the military should at this point exist to do.
Yeah.
Like the military exists. I mean, in some places, the military has set the example. You're exactly right. Like racial integration was first achieved inside the military in meaningful ways, right? Black and white soldiers went to fight together in Korea, and they never met a black person before. And they came back and like, I'm not a racist. Like he was my bunkmate, you know, like, so it's had that forcing, which is why the nonsense that was peddled after 2020 about the rampant white extremism or extremism in the military was so toxic and so offensive to so many. When Milley espoused those things and Austin launched the witch hunt for extremists in the ranks, and they said there was systemic racism in the ranks, well, where were you guys for the last 30 years? Where were you? Were your units just blatantly racist and you weren't doing anything about it? You know, Milley, you were down at Fort Hood. How dare you be a commander at that racist base with that Confederate name on it? I mean, they were catering to political constituencies. And when we actually did the studies like the Marine Corps on gender, it showed that in the military, extremism or racism is at a clip of 0.007%. 0.007. The general population has a racism index of 7%. So the military is exponentially better at taking diverse populations, to your point, and stripping away the racial disparities and focusing on what we do together as a team. So what I don't want is bringing everybody out of basic training and then reminding them of why they're different because of their skin color, or reminding them why they're different because of their gender. That's not what we celebrate once you're in uniform. We celebrate the flag on your shoulder and the unit patch on the other side. That's who you are. Yeah. Not tell me more about why you're different or why you're aggrieved. So the diversity of the military is just a beautiful byproduct of the fact that people from all backgrounds are patriotic and courageous, and they want to be a part of that. And that's great. But we don't have to then force it we have to have a certain percentage of this or a certain percentage of that, which only creates differences and animosity inside units. Like, let's get everybody in that wants to fight for the home team. And then it's not our job to look like the civilian world. Like, we are distinctly different in our culture than the civilian world. And there's a lot the civilian world could learn from the military, and that's great. But we don't have to mirror the Harvard faculty lounge. Like, keep your crap over there. You teach kids, we do war. And that's the problem, is you've got generals that have been willing to let that stuff come in.
Do you believe that a required, a mandatory service component for at the age of 18 would be of benefit? Now, not military service, but, there's been a push. McChrystal was a big proponent of it, of required service. So whether it's Peace Corps, military, Teach for America, but just everybody feeling that, they're all in, everybody plays a role before you go to college, however it pans out. But at 18, 1 or 2 years of required service.
I understand the idea. I understand the attraction to the idea. You go to Israel and you see all the young people who are invested there, and the sense of purpose is intoxicating. Like, everyone's all in for the nation, and that's really special and beneficial. However, I just know how Washington works. And it would start as national service, and then it would end up as national activism camp. So it would be, okay, yes, you can serve the military, or you can go to the State Department, or you can go to the EPA, or you can go to the Human Rights Campaign, or you can go to this, or you can go to, and pretty soon service is defined by Washington, D.C., and you really just have publicly funded activism or publicly funded government growth. And you don't get the forcing function of a military crucible where you're focused on the flag and the meaning of the country and an oath to the Constitution, and you just grow government. So I actually think the only environment in which it would be useful would be something focused on the military, and more of what I've thought is something like a Minuteman Corps. Almost this, I think of all the guys that I went to college with, or the guys here at Fox, or people that I know. They're able-bodied, they're patriots, but they're not in the military, right? Because they want to do other things. They want to start a business or raise families. But if coming out of college or before they were 25, they were given an option to, say, do 4 weeks of training, some basic rifle training, maybe get a uniform, do some fitness training, and then once a year they check in and show that they're maintaining their fitness standards. And in return for being a part of this Minuteman Corps, maybe you get some tax relief or your college debt paid for or whatever. I think you'd have millions of young men and women who would voluntarily join such a corps to say, hey, if World War III happens, then I want to be a part of the next greatest generation to defend the country. And I've got a little skin in the game. I got a little skin in the game, as opposed to you're either all in or you're just a civilian. So I like something like that.
I heard you talk about that. You talked about that on another podcast, and I was listening to it. This kind of, it's almost a draft idea in some regard, where it's like
mandatory,
right?
Not mandatory,
not
but
mandatory,
voluntary.
but you actually, we're able to know, okay, we have X amount of individuals that have signed up if their country needs them. I like that idea.
Correct.
I like the idea of it, and I do think there would probably be a big draw to it.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I know those guys, because you know what, dude, so many guys and gals who say it just wasn't right for my life at that time, but
right.
I really would have. And I think if they could say, hey, I'm part of the 186th Minuteman Regiment,
yeah.
and I'm in it, they would love that,
yeah.
And I don't know. I like it.
I like it too. All right. I want to talk real briefly about polarization. So, you have to know on some level that you're a polarizing individual, right? Is that, and I don't mean
sure.
that, I don't mean that in a bad way, but like people clearly know where you stand.
Yep.
So how do you help stop the polarization in our country right now? Or do you not believe that we should even be doing that? Do you believe that the polarization is helpful?
I don't think it's helpful.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's, I don't think catering to try to bridge the divide is a good use of my time at this moment. Like I see myself as an information warrior. I want to make a better argument than the other guy. I'm not perfect. I'm sinful, mistaken, and wrong plenty of times. But I believe in God. I believe in country. I believe in the Constitution. I believe in these institutions that and so I'm going to do everything I can with my shoulder to the plow to be a part of what I think is advancing the good guys and the home team. And I want to be better at it than the left and the other side is at theirs, because there is no moment where there's unilateral disarmament, where the left sort of steps. And I write about this a lot in the book. And part of the betrayal is, our generation of guys and gals went over to the Middle East for 2 decades and fought wars, one iteration at a time. And I've feel betrayed, and some part of that betrayal is that the conservatives or whoever here at home, while we were fighting, lost a huge battle here at home as domestic institutions were just gobbled up by these left-wing forces that didn't give a damn about our service over there and used it as an opportunity to peddle whatever they were peddling here. So not only do I think it's not time well spent to try to find some middle. I want to win. I want to be better at it than they are. And I think our arguments are good and right and true and more attractive to common sense Americans. And so I want to make that argument better so that people say, yeah, you know what? I do like the cops. They're good guys. And I do think we should have a border. And, I think we should rebuild our military and, I should keep more of my tax dollars, just basic stuff that I think resonates with most Americans, but there are really powerful wedge issues that divide us and people that divide us. It's not my goal to exploit them for further division. My goal is to stand, for what I believe is true and fight for it. And if that leads to polarization, to me, it's a reflection of how far the left has gone to sort of reject the basic tenets of what our country represents. That the whole idea of your daddy's Democrat Party today doesn't look anything. The party today doesn't look anything like the party of 50 years ago. Whereas if you look at the basic platform of what conservatives have been fighting for 50 years, it's more or less the same. The problem is we're really bad at it. We lose a lot. So there's not as much to conserve anymore. What are we conserving? The polarization is unfortunate. I wish we would at least rally around our flag. But we're in uncharted territory where we're trying to keep a country while simultaneously training up our kids in K through 12 education to not like that country. And that's a recipe for even more polarization, because I'm not going to back down. I know how special this place is. I know who my Lord and Savior is, and I'm not backing down. And if you call me the bad guy or you call me an extremist, well, I'm not going to bend to that. I'm not an extremist. I'm not the bad guy. I'm going to fight. So no one relishes the division, but it is just an unfortunate reality of our moment. And we've been divided before. I mean, we fought a war over it, and it just this feels different though because it feels like one side, and I'm impugning the other side, is against what this country was founded on and wants something very different, wants to fundamentally transform it. And I feel like it's our job to stand in the gap.
So I get that, and I understand where you're coming from. That again, you're not trying to lend to the polarization, but you want to stand true, and frankly, you want to win. You want your argument to win. You want people to hear your argument. Clearly, your argument is that the left is wrong, and that they are, like you said, they're in a different place, and we're fighting a different battle. But from a human perspective, like does Pete Hegseth have people in his life that fall on that side that you can, because I do. I have friends that are very conservative, and I have friends that are insanely liberal. And, in my world, maybe it doesn't happen in yours. Sure. Like those are conversations that I stay away from on some things because I know it's not going to lead to anything good.
Sure. I get that.
But do you have people in your life that you're close to that are on the other side of this aisle in a big way?
A few, a lot less than I used to.
Okay.
And you know why? I don't blame me. And there is a level of intolerance among the so-called tolerance crowd that is off the charts, especially after Donald Trump, where they assign every ism and negative thing they could ever imagine to me because of my political stances. Well, it's pretty hard if you're going to call me a racist, or you're going to call me a white nationalist, or you're going to call me a dictator supporter, like what's the next sentence in that conversation?
Sure.
Like, why are we talking again? Go pound sand. So I've tried harder for my own family and my own kids to find a community, a church, a town, where our values are reinforced in a world gone mad. And I feel like given the media and social media and public schools and the influences and pressures on fragile human hearts like kids are stronger than ever before. And I don't want them riding that wave of maturity with someone else putting an imprint on their heart and soul. And that's obviously going to happen in the future when they get older. But while I still have a chance to mold them, like I'm quite happy to have them in a cocoon where we worship together as a family and where we talk politics and we talk about the proper role of government. It sounds really boring, right? But I don't want them to let go over there and to hang out with that atheist family over there that's going to tell you everything we taught you is bunk, or here. So I want them exposed to other ideas. There's no doubt about that. I just don't. The left has lost, from what I've seen, except for places like Fox, where we have some really smart Democrats and other folks who in good nature can assign political disagreement without saying you are a horrible person. I feel like I can have a debate with someone on the left, have a lot of fun debating ideas without having to call them every label name in the book. That's how it used to be done. That's how it should be done. That's not what's said or done to us. And as a result, like I've lost touch with family members, with people who send me emails calling me horrible things. Yeah. And I'm like, well, then I don't think we're going to hang out, and that's unfortunate, but it's kind of the nice part is you find other friends and you find other people that align with your values. And that's a good thing.
And I agree with you on this idea of, there's a finite amount of time that your kids can be with you. You can teach them the values you want to teach them. You can make sure that they understand the principles of what you believe in. And then at a certain point, they go out into the world and you trust that you've taught them those values and those principles and they stand by them and they continue on. And no matter who they come across or, that they stay true to them. And, I'm about to do that with my 18-year-old daughter. She's flying out of here on June 27th. And, and I have no doubt that she is prepared for whatever she encounters, within college and the military after. But, you know, I think one of the things that I always say, Pete, and I think you guys do a tremendous job. Listen, Patrick Murphy is on Fox News every day now, and I always I joke around with him about that a lot. But I think he does a really good job of sharing his viewpoint from the opposite side. And I don't know if I just have rose-colored glasses on, but I believe there is a way that we can collectively come together and have civil discourse and get to a common ground.
I think that's a wonderful thing. I think that's the right ideal. I think it's not happening right now. And I think we're just at a moment where, you know, both sides are dug in, heading in different directions. Our job is to keep it as best we can on the civil discourse level, right? No, doesn't need to. And, you know, I don't know. I'm a little pessimistic on that question, and I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, to wrap it up, one of the things I always say, and listen, you have some incredible stories in here, which we haven't even touched on. The most interesting one to me was how you ended up leaving the military, which I'm going to save it for those to pick the book up and find out for yourself. But I was unaware of that story, and it was pretty eye-opening for me to read that. So you've dealt with a lot of stuff over the course of your life. And, you know, I always talk about resilience and how you bounce back from things. And one of the things that we, you know, stuck true to as a family after Travis was killed in Iraq was living lives worthy of his sacrifice. And that's easy to say. It's harder to do. Because, you know, we had just been dealt with the largest tragedy of our lives. And some days it was hard to get out of bed. And so I've really dug into this idea of resilience and what it means. And so I'd love to know from you what it means to live a resilient life.
Well, I've long looked up to and admire what your family has done, how you've turned that tragedy into something so special that's changed so many other people's lives. I mean, a big part of that resiliency, as I know you know firsthand, is finding that next chapter of purpose in your life. Like how do I pour into other people, given, you know, the challenges that I face, and you face it on a level that I can't even relate to. I just know that as I've gotten older and more familiar with my own human nature, with our own frailty, that I got to give it to God, and that, you know, there's all wisdom is found. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of all knowledge and wisdom, and, you know, having that reverence and respect and understanding that He has a plan and He's at the wheel, and we don't know what our part is or why things happen, but they're all according to His purpose and His will. And for me, this was about my kids. You know, I talk about wanting to pass things on to my kids, and then you realize, well, my kids don't really care what you say. You know, they want to see what you do. They want to see what kind of man you are. And I spent a lot of years out of the military, you know, rudderless and running around like some of it related to, you know, reacting to being in certain situations in the military. Other of it just sort of like being a reckless person, and that creates carnage, and it creates, the Bible says, you know, sin is slavery, and you end up you bring on your own problems. And the liberation of knowing your Savior and submitting to Him on a regular basis is the only thing that gives me an opportunity, or is the place where I find the most enduring resilience. In that, nothing I'm going to do here is going to save the world. Yeah. There is no perfection on earth. I'm not perfect. We're not going to create a perfect government. There's no perfect solution. We're fallen people in a fallen world, and our job is to be humble servants in our corner of His kingdom and to advance that. And, you know, you have a chance to do it through the foundation. I have a chance to do it here. And that's a blessing in and of itself, to know great people and work with them. So you've inspired a lot of people. I think I probably stole that phrase. I've said it a million times now. I know probably where I got it from: live worthy of their sacrifice, because that is, like, every time I speak, the first thing I think when I look out at a crowd of hundreds of people and the lights is, I think of the guys I serve, and like, that will never get a standing ovation, will never have lights on them. And it's just the first, anyway, I could go on and on about that, but you've inspired a lot of people. I appreciate it. And thanks for what you're doing.
Thanks, Pete. Well, everyone, pick up The War on Warriors, Pete's new book. This is what in how many have you written so far?
This is 5.
This is 5. This is 5. It's a good book. It's pretty eye-opening. Lots I didn't know. It's going to get a lot of reaction. Be it good or bad, it's going to get a lot of reaction. It's out now. Pete, thanks for all you do. And thanks for what you do to help highlight the work of the Travis Manion Foundation. We really appreciate it with your platform, what you go out and do.
You got it, Ryan. Thank you so much.